Joining us now from Capitol Hill is Kentucky Senator Rand Paul. He's a Republican member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, also the Homeland Security Committee. Senator, thanks so much for joining us. Let's get to some of the substantive issues that you're dealing with right now. Your committee chairman, Bob Corker, described the walkback by the White House as confusion. Larry Kudlow, the president's new chief economic advisor, says there was no confusion. He simply says Ambassador Haley just got ahead of herself. What was your reaction? Did the White House undercut Ambassador Haley?
Well, I think before you talk about sanctions, we ought to talk about, what evidence is there that that Russia was complicit in this attack. In fact, for that matter, I still look at the attack and say, Assad either must be the dumbest dictator on the planet or maybe he didn't do it. I have yet to see evidence that he did do it. The intelligence agencies claim they have that evidence, but think about it. Does it make any sense? He's been winning the war for the last couple of years. The only thing that would galvanize the world to attack Assad directly is a chemical attack. It killed relatively few people compared to what can be killed with traditional bombs, traditional machine guns, traditional tanks. And so you wonder, really, what logic would there be for Assad to be using chemical weapons? So before we get to the Russians, we have to first determine that Syria was implicated, and then really we ought to determine what the connection is between Russia and Syria on this attack.
As you know, not just the U.S., but France and the U.K., they participated in the bombing of these chemical sites in Syria. Are you saying, Senator, the president had bad intelligence?
I don't know. I haven't seen the intelligence. We have a briefing this afternoon where I may see some of this. But the difficulty is these things are not a slam dunk. This was back in 2013, President Obama looked at that chemical attack, and at that point in time, there were his generals saying, hey, it's not a slam dunk, because you can detect that there were Syrian planes, you can detect that Syrians dropped bombs, but it's sometimes difficult to know whether they bombed an existing depot of weapons, and the rebels have been known to use chemical weapons, or whether the Syrians did it. If the Syrians did it, it gets back to the question, Assad must be the dumbest dictator on the planet to use chemical weapons when he knows from previous evidence it's the only thing that gets the world galvanized to attack him.
Or he may have thought he could get away with it. Who knows? Your committee chairman, Bob Corker, also is expected to put forth what's called an AUMF, an authorization for the use of military force, new legislation. First of all, do you know what's in it? Are you likely to support it? Where do you stand on that?
It is a good idea to debate whether we should be at war or not. Unfortunately, the use of authorization force, the resolution they're putting forward, actually expands the president's ability to commit war. And so if it were a limitation on the president's power, I'd be for it. This actual resolution will expand the president's authority. For the first time, it will list 6 or 7 groups that we're at war with. You remember after 9/11, we were at war with those who attacked us and who aided or abetted them. But now this is going to codify 6 or 7 groups, maybe 10 to 15 countries that we can be at war in. But really, it's limitless. If we detect any of the groups having activity in any country, the president can go to war there. He just has to submit a notice saying, hey guys, we're now at war in a new country. And that to me is not a limitation. It's actually an expansion of war making, and I think a huge mistake.
In an editorial on CNN.com, you said the president should trust his gut when it comes to Syria. Tell our viewers what you mean, because I've heard him over the years many times. He wants the U.S. out of Syria, out of Iraq, out of Afghanistan, thinks the U.S. has spent way too much money there and lost too many lives.
The president's instinct, his campaign rhetoric have all been for less intervention. That's one of the reasons I was attracted to his candidacy. But he's surrounded himself now with advisors who give him the opposite advice. Only 2 weeks ago, he was saying it's time to come out of Syria. There are still rumblings that he still believes that. And so really, we go from one belief to the opposite reaction. In Afghanistan, he said it's a mistake to keep building their bridges and roads. There are people who hate us, and yet we keep sending good money after bad. To me, it can all be distilled into this. Even Pompeo admitted this, the candidate for the Secretary of State. He admitted there is no military solution in Afghanistan. Today, we had an Assistant Secretary of State say there is no military solution in Yemen or in Syria. So it's hard for me to understand or really to comprehend. They're asking our young men and women to go to war in a war that has no military solution. So are we really reliving Vietnam, where we're telling our young men and women, take one more village so we can have a little bit more negotiated settlement? I don't think that's what a lot of our young men and women sign up for. And so I'm a voice in Washington saying enough's enough. The Afghan war is many years past its mission. We should declare victory and come home.
Is there any chance you're going to vote to confirm Mike Pompeo as the next Secretary of State?
If he came out publicly and said he's time to declare victory and come home, but he just said last week he doesn't believe that. He thinks that we have a continued mission in Afghanistan, and I challenged him with the president's own words, saying the president said it was time to come home, and Pompeo doesn't agree with that. And that's what I actually think is really bad about his nomination, is that he will be giving advice to the president that goes against the president's good instincts that the war has run its course.
What about the CIA director nominee, Gina Haspel? Where do you stand, bottom line, on her confirmation?
I don't think we should have someone in charge of our CIA who was in charge of a torture camp in Thailand. I think what she did, it goes against everything really America represents, and it'd be a big mistake to elevate her to that position. It's sort of like telling the rest of the world that if they capture our soldiers, you know, it must be okay to torture them because we have appointed someone to be head of the CIA who used to run a torture camp. So, no, I think she's a terrible representative, and I will absolutely oppose her coming forward and oppose her nomination.
Let's get to another domestic issue, very sensitive issue, important one. You held up the last spending bill before it ultimately passed. You blasted the process that brought it to the floor in the first place. You have a new proposal, Senator, that in its implementation would cut around $7 billion in military spending alone. How are you going to get support from your fellow Republican senators and Democratic senators, for that matter, some of the Democratic senators, to cut military spending?
Well, I think conservatives across the country want someone who will champion holding the line on spending. Our budget actually doesn't specify where the cuts would be. If Congress can't agree to cut 1% across the board, if they can't agree where the cuts would be, it would be 1% across the board and would include military. But let's say Congress said we wanted to do it all domestic, they could. The bottom line has to equal 1%. And so a 1% cut each year, it's about $13 billion, actually balances the budget in 5 years. What's interesting about my budget proposal is that, one, it's what I think conservatives want, but two, it's a privileged motion, which means the Senate will vote on it. They can't prevent a vote on mine because they didn't present their own budget. So I'm doing their job for them. I'm presenting a budget for them, and I will also include instructions to allow for the expansion of health savings accounts. I think we could totally transform and make insurance more competitive and bring the prices down by expanding the marketplace where people could have health savings accounts. So I will do two things. Balanced budget, balances over 5 years with a 1% across the board cut, but then also expand health savings accounts larger than anyone's ever tried before in the past.
And as you know, some estimates now projecting a $1 trillion deficit in the not too distant future, annual deficit. We're going to continue this conversation, Senator Paul, down the road. In the meantime, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.